Chapter 3. The Searcher and the Searched. You are so thankful. Your business is going well, thank Allah. And you must return to the big city. But your main goal is to get to Joy Tea Shop as quickly as possible. You conclude your business and hurry to the shop of the man with the kind eyes. Joy Teller looks as if he was waiting for you. He pours tea for you both after other customers have been served, sits down, and asks you if you've thought about who Isa might be. You say he must be associated with Allah somehow, since he's so pure. You say he must also be a person, since he communicated with me. He must care about me a lot, since he gave me the dream, and then he told me where to come to learn about him. He must be good, to be so bright and pure. I am so drawn to him. I sense love coming from him. Well said, smiled Joy Teller. You are totally correct. He has all those characteristics and many more. Would you like me to tell you a story somewhat like one he told his other followers? Of course, you say. Isa Misi once told his followers a story like this, said Joy Teller. There once was a very prosperous shepherd who had more than 100 sheep. He had many workers to help him care for his sheep. Every day the shepherd would make sure his sheep were well taken care of. He washed them often, so no mud would get caked on them, which might make it harder for them to walk. He poured oil over their noses to keep bugs out because he didn't want them to get parasites. He checked each one every day to make sure they were healthy. He even gave every sheep a name because he loved them so much. Unlike other shepherds, he could tell everyone apart. He then visited potential pastures to make sure his sheep fed in the best ones. His sheep were never hungry, and they never were thirsty either. He found streams for them to drink from that were shallow and calm. His sheep were not afraid to drink deeply of clean water. His sheep were the fattest and healthiest around. At night, the worst time for wild animals or thieves to try to steal or eat sheep, this good shepherd stationed his workers all the way around his sheep, and he himself guarded the door to the sheepfold, so no one could enter who might want to harm them. The shepherd kept a careful watch, especially at night, to make sure every sheep and little lamb was protected from harm. His sheep knew their shepherd's voice, as most sheep do. Every morning the shepherd went ahead of his flock and led them to pasture. He called them to follow him, and they gladly did. Thieves and wild animals never succeeded in stealing a sheep, thanks to the love and care of this shepherd. Until one day. But it wasn't thieves or animals that were the problem. One little lamb was calmly grazing. Then he saw good grass in another place. He kept finding grass that seemed tastier than the bite before. He was so confident of the shepherd's care that he wandered away from him and the rest of the flock, not realizing what he was doing. He assumed he could always hear the shepherd's voice. He didn't notice that he had strayed further and further away. Suddenly, he realized he had wandered all day. He looked around and did not know where he was. Then his wool got caught in a thorny bush, and he could not do anything to get out. He was stuck. He bleated loudly. He kept crying, hoping the shepherd would hear. He cried for hours, with only silence in return. At day's end, the shepherd gathered the flock and led them back to the sheepfold. But as he and his workers finished counting to make sure all the sheep were present, they realized there was one missing. They counted again, hoping they had miscounted. But sadly, they hadn't. There was one lamb missing. At this point, Joy Teller paused. He asked you to remember all the good fat sheep in the sheepfold and the fact that the day was almost over. Then he asked you, what do you think the shepherd did? After all, he was very prosperous, and losing one little lamb wouldn't cost him very much. You think about it. First, you think the shepherd wouldn't know where the lamb was and won't want to take the time to search for it, especially if he had so many other nice sheep and daylight was almost over. Then you remember that the shepherd took good care of all his other sheep. You ask Joy Teller to tell you since you can't decide. He said, okay, let's finish the story. There were only a few hours of daylight left now, and it was a bit dangerous for the shepherd, but he ran as quickly as he could back to the pasture. He looked and saw nothing. He searched nearby. He searched further away. As daylight was fading, he searched near a steep canyon and thought he heard something. Was it a wild animal or his lamb? He followed the sound, while keeping watch for wild animals who might want to attack him. The sound grew louder. It was his lost little lamb. As the shepherd came up to the lamb, he saw it was caught in a pricky bush, and its foot had begun to bleed. Joy Teller paused again. Now, what do you think the shepherd did? If you had a sheep that wandered away, what would you do? Would you spank it and yell at it and remind it of the difficulties and danger you had to find it? You considered this option, but think the shepherd might respond differently, given that he went to look for it. But still, the lamb took a lot of trouble. You tell Joy Teller that the shepherd would probably not treat it badly, since he took the trouble to go after it in the first place. Well said, said Joy Teller. Gently the shepherd freed his little lamb. He picked it up, carefully put it over his shoulder, and carried it back to the fold. He was so happy to have found it that when he got home, after he cleaned the wounds of the lamb and put it to bed, he called his friends and neighbors and declared a celebration. He said, "Let's celebrate. I found my little lost lamb." Now, Joy Teller said, go home and ponder this story. Why do you think I told it to you? What is the shepherd like? We'll talk more the next time you come. We encourage you to wait a day and think about the things you've read before reading the next story.